This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the town of North Haven.
I'd like to call our April 17th Board of Finance meeting to order. First order of business, minutes from our regular meeting from March 20th. Everyone's had a chance to look at it. Questions or comments? Motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll do that.
Second? All in favor? Aye. We really have no old business other than budget, which we will under item 4, so new business reports.
Yeah, I have a question on page 2, Ed. How can office supplies, we encumber $35,000 for office supplies? Is that like furniture or?
Well, there were some cabinets that had dealt with.
So it's really kind of furniture, office furniture? Okay. I kind of thought that, but,
Ed, on the same page, the office supplies for the probate court, do we make a contribution that they're not self-sustaining?
No, we have to contribute money for our share of the supplies for Mike Grant over in East Haven.
Right,
When he
yeah.
asks for it, we send him over money. But that's-
Correct, he only bills us, what, once a year or less?
Yeah.
okay.
And if he doesn't need it, he's going to bill us.
Right, okay.
I have another question, page 4. The permit software. So we budgeted 25 and now we're adding, so it looks like the software went from 25 grand to 39.
We added some additional features.
We added features. Okay. So it wasn't the straight fee. Okay.
Anything else on expenditures?
I have a question. On page 5, I take it our audit contract went up, the expense from 30 to 36, 250?
The bottom.
Is this,
He finished his special audit? Is that what you're billing there?
No,
No,
That's
this,
that I'm giving up on.
You gave up on him?
Well, he was supposed to get back to me a couple of weeks ago. He's got to check with the people in the field, and I haven't heard anything since.
Well, on that score, we should hire someone else.
Yeah, we should bring someone else in.
Yeah.
But to Pat's point, if we didn't expend the special audits, where's the,
on page 5, it looks like 36,250.
Right, that's for the regular audit, right.
Right, so the contract, the new auditors are more expensive.
Well, that's the annual audit.
No, that's just our regular audit.
That's a regular
Budget might have
Well,
been
the-
low,
but-
depending on how much went to us versus the Board of Ed.
No, I understand. I'm talking about line 1, audit contract. Wasn't it 30 as it's indicated here on the budget? And now it looks like we paid 36,250 unless I'm
No,
mistaken.
that's correct. That is what we paid, but there might have been some extra work in there that you had to do,
Oh, okay.
so.
So what is the annual fee?
I don't have it in front of me, Pat. I'll have to get
Okay,
it for you.
that's fine.
anything else on expenditures? Revenue? We're at 94.8%. And special funds. And finally, Board of Ed.
just a comment, I like the narrative that we received from the superintendent and that he talked about a freeze. I thought that was good. I don't think we've ever seen something like that, but I think the narrative was helpful.
I thought so too, and they weren't 100% clear about why the administrator's line, the IT line was going to be over.
But it does look like their new business manager, Pamela, has become very proactive, which I think all of us will appreciate.
I agree with Rich. I think it also, apparently, he's figured out that a lot of lines weren't encumbered correctly, because there's a lot of negatives here that what she says are getting corrected. There's only 4 items in here, and she says they're going to stay negative through year end. So there must have been a lot of issues with the encumbrances.
Is that because it's encumbered?
Well, they were encumbering it, and I guess it didn't need to be, or it wasn't.
The amount was probably wrong, is my guess.
Yeah, that's why she brought them up.
Well, I think what she's bringing up, if you look at the available budget, a lot of these total available budget is negative. I think what she's saying is the encumbrance is incorrect. It sounds like she's fixed them, but that 4 of them are still going to be negative when the end of the year rolls.
Okay.
That's what I think she's saying.
If that's the case, I understand it now.
And she's made a lot of headway in a short period of time she's
Yeah.
been here.
I
You're
agree.
interacting with her well, too?
Yeah, I thought it was a great letter.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
Even the gentleman that presented their budget, Frank, I mean, I was very impressed with him.
Yeah,
And
he
I
was
think we're going
good.
to be as impressed with Pam.
Yeah, he was good too.
Anything else on the reports?
No, just, as an example, their line 321A, the contractual institutional services or something of that sort, to see that in the negative $209,000. Again, this is very revealing, very open, that they have issues that will be addressed in the next 2 to 3 months. So, as they shift money around and determine what might have been overspent and so forth. So, this is a great improvement from the past.
Yeah, I think we have a good caliber person here now that can,
And you will continue to see outstanding compliance with the Board of Ed, with us. Ed and I meet with Pam and Patrick on a regular basis, and it's going very well right now, so.
anything else in the reports? Got a motion to accept the reports as presented?
I make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Item 4, our fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. I've seen a few of our board members at the meeting, others I know have watched it on cable. Questions or comments before we move to the resolutions?
I have both, a comment and
Bring it on,
question.
Pat.
Okay. In talking with people in my district, District 3, they're very pleased that there is no budget increase this year. However, some are concerned about the increase in expenses. So I'm looking at this letter dated January 7th, 2019, from our first selectman to the Board of Finance, indicating that the Board of Selectmen would support a total budget increase of 2.6. Now, that's considerably less than 4.9. And what accounts for the difference?
Well, we're enhancing public safety. We've talked at length about the fire department. We're adding 4 dispatchers in January to make it a more robust 911 system, which is vulnerable right now. So, although there are a couple of people that disagree with this budget, the bottom line is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. The bottom line is we're enhancing the town services and still maintaining a no tax increase. This narrative about that I see in the newspapers about it's gloom and doom, we're compromising the town's financial integrity, is a bunch of nonsense. That's not the case. And I can say that as someone who works with Ed every day, who understands these finances backwards and forwards, who is someone that's done this for 10 years now. We are on very solid footing right now. So much so that I'm already planning years in advance to ensure that the town continues to improve, to ensure that the town continues to manage its debt service. Yes, the debt service has risen, or has risen. It's risen because we have the middle school we're paying on now, the police department, which was voted by over 75% of the public in its affirmative. We're paving roads every year, and we're still offering a no tax increase to improve the town. Now, the notion of reducing taxes and giving everyone a $50 refund, as an example, to compromise public safety, to reduce police and reduce the dispatchers, to to overlook the fact that we're improving the town by improving the infrastructure. We could have done none of this down through the years. We could have allowed the middle school not to be built, which would have been condemned because we were involved, myself and Ed with NEASC, the New England Association of Schools and Council. We knew that middle school was on the verge of being condemned. So a large part of the debt increase is for the middle school. We're still paying off the high school. So we're on solid footing right now. And I'm going to debate anybody that continues to say that we're not on solid footing. I'm going to debate that fiercely because I know what's going on here, because I'm involved with all the details. And this man here does a tremendous job. We work every day on the finances of this government. We're already planning 6, 7, 10 years in advance. And as I've said many times before, the top line revenue growth here will continue to grow as long as I'm North Haven's first selectman. So I'm taking a page out of my corporate business career. And that page is you improve the corporation through largely funding the improvement by the top line revenue growth. And that's what we're doing. Now you might say, well, Mike, all right, well, that's how you feel, but how can you be so sure? Because I do it every day. Sherman Katz, last meeting at the Board of Selectmen meeting, asked some very good questions. And I said this is one of the toughest jobs I've ever had. Despite the fact that I ran $1 billion corporation, despite the fact that I've had CFOs up and down the East Coast report to me, let's put aside the mergers and acquisitions that I was involved with. Let's put aside the fact that I was a national consultant, managing private equity companies to purchase companies on multiples of EBITDA. In this career, let's put all that aside. Not only have Ed and I been working together with this Board of Finance for 10 years, but I'm also the chairman of the Finance and Audit Committee for Connecticut Conference of Municipalities and the treasurer of the Council of Governments. So I like to think we know what we're doing here. So when I see the narratives about compromising financial fiscal security, stability, it's nonsense. We know what we're doing here, and my goal is to continue to improve the town and maintain a no tax increase. That's the goal.
I think the improvements in the town are great, and I just wanted to be clear about 2.6,
Yes.
that this percentage was before the debt service.
So Pat,
Issues.
we've worked very well with you down through the years, and we really appreciate you on this board. We really do.
Are you about to kick me off?
And you've always been gracious enough to sit on the Open Space Committee. This board really enjoys working with you. But the reason I'm saying that is because you raise a valid question. It's a very valid point. We did on January 7th put a 2.6%, whatever that number was. But that January 7th timeframe is more a procedural issue and a recommendation well before the workshop sessions start. And then we see the requests from the town departments. So that's kind of what it's about.
Thank you. Now I have a couple of other suggestions. First of all, it looks like the Board of Ed is not going to be paying a contribution to the pension plan. The $159,000 that they might,
Kind of still up in the air.
So
but it looks like it's not going to happen. But it could. But
Yeah.
But so here, I assume that the budget has not changed since last month. The figures are still the same, and the insurance, medical insurance, is an issue that where we possibly could save money. In reviewing the finance meeting, there was a discussion about what Brown & Brown recommended as costs for this coming 1920 budget. And I think it was 5.8% increase for the town. And when I looked at the budget figure, we have 6.5% listed. And for the Board of Ed, they have 7.2, and their suggested, I guess, increase was 4.3. So with those reductions, if we followed the agent's suggestions, there would be a savings there.
So we budgeted at 6% on each side, right?
Towns have a budget at 6.2.
Right.
And
Yeah.
keep in mind that we started the year on the medical one a little bit in the hole, so we need to make that up as well.
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
How much is the whole?
300,000.
300,000 for the town?
The town side.
Yeah, okay. And the Board of Ed? Do you know?
Maybe more, 150, 200,000.
Because, well, if we actually did 4.3 on the Board of Ed, that would save about $187,000.
So what we try to do, Pat, is forecast a little bit higher, because when you're self-insured, you want to make sure that the vicissitudes, the ups, the valleys, the peaks and valleys of claims history, when we put money aside, that we are able to cover any shortfalls, like Ed is saying. So based upon the conversations we had with the Board of Ed and the agents, we ended up putting in 6%, which is part of the 2.9% increase. So on a self-insured model, you always want to be a little bit more, maybe a higher on a percentage.
Sure, I
versus
understand that.
conservative. So that's kind of what we did on that.
But the Board of Ed difference is significant, 4.3 versus 7.2.
So we factored in 6 though, right, for Board of Ed?
It's
They
7.
did their own
They
thing.
did it all. So then the 7.2 you're referring to, it originally started at 6, that's what it was. But Brown and Brown basically gave them the numbers to put in there. So that's kind of the way it works.
Well, I think these changes would change the mill rate.
But
Suggestions?
we then run the risk of a potential not having enough cushion in there. So I see your point, but it's always better to bake in a little bit higher in a self-insured model.
You had something else, Pat?
I don't think Brown and Brown gave a number that high, though. I think they wanted an increase of, I believe, 296,000. Is that? And
The
that's
Board of Ed, you're talking.
Yeah, the Board of Ed.
I don't recall.
Yeah, because their numbers came together, I think, a little sooner than Brown and Brown's final analysis. So,
7.5, the change is 468,000, but you're saying they're roughly 170,000 behind.
From last
So
year.
maybe it's a 300,000 increase, which is probably closer to 5%.
I thought that $300,000 figure of under budgeted initial costs, I thought that was for the whole program somehow split between
No, that was our
the town.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you look at the number, if what Ed just said, the 180 and the 300, we back to 180 over the delta they have here, which is 468. Now you're talking about a $300,000 increase, which is about a 5%. So the numbers seem to be tracking close.
So
We can do a little bit more research, but
Pat's suggestion is to drop the percentage and then save the money in the Board of Ed budget, is that what you're saying, Pat?
Yes,
So, I mean, they've got
because
to...
that's assuming that they're not getting the pension charge, and they've had no reductions in the
So
budget.
as far as the teacher's pension,
is the pension out of this? Pension is out of this. The 159 is still out of the total number?
No,
You
Put
put
it added and just subtracted.
Yeah. we basically told them they had to find room.
that's
Right.
We told them, you had to absorb it, it was
Okay,
152,000.
so just clear the point that if it does come in, they have to absorb it.
Yes.
I just wanted to clean between the town
They
and the Board of
understand
Ed.
that in that percentage of increase of the Board of Ed, they have to find the money, the $159,000.
If it happens,
Now,
yes.
this is the thing we're going back and forth with all over the state right now, with both CCM and cost, where we're not really sure whether or not it's going to be actually something we're going to have to endure, but in our case, we're keeping it in to be on the safe side.
Okay.
So, but just to come back to, because Pat raises an interesting point, Brown and Brown would have to recommend to the Board of Ed to reduce that before we ended up getting involved with that. And I don't think they're going to do that. I really don't.
They would have to recommend when? Now?
So you're saying take the 7.2% down to what?
4.3. 4.3.
So that'd have to be a recommendation to us, because we can't make the decision and then all of a sudden they potentially run a deficit, because there's, unfortunately, they know probably better than we do. There's a lot of major illnesses that require some heavy utilization of the insurance. So, I see your point, but I don't think we're in a position to arbitrarily make the decision to do that.
I think the number factored up because they were taking care of the deficiency they had already.
I thought they said in the meeting that this year alone, they're running, claims are running ahead of what the Board of Ed had budgeted. Isn't that what they said? I don't know if you remember that either, Mike, but I know we asked that question.
Yeah.
Because what the budget, or what their numbers are going to reflect is just what we're putting aside, not the actual claims, right?
Correct.
So it's possible, and maybe I'm wrong or right, Pat, but if that's true, they might have a slight deficit for this year as well.
You said you had something else, Pat?
No, I think that covered my suggestions.
Anyone else have questions, comments,
Well, I just-
suggestions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the board if there was any other reaction that we have from the public hearing that occurred.
I think it's the first time I've ever, in 12 years, where not one question was asked to the Board of Ed.
That's true. That is,
And really, nothing was really questioned on the town side per se, other than,
So, Michael, to answer your question, we get over 120 calls here a day, and other than what was said at the public meeting, we've gotten not one call on this budget.
I think the public is happy with the numbers.
does the public know they can call in and get it through the first selectman or something?
After these
know, they're
meetings,
gonna complain.
After all these years, when I handle most of the calls, I'd like to think so. We're very accessible here in Town Hall.
Well, this is the place they should be. We could have a call-in hour sometime. But,
Oh, Michael, let me say, nobody calling to denounce the budget. I've had people who have asked to see me in the office that have thanked us for slightly enhancing services and not having a no tax increase.
okay. I'm sure you hear many complimentary things, and it's true. There's some great aspects to this. During the budget hearing, I did hear a mixed response from some of the usual concerned citizens. But it's true that some people advocated paying for improved fire services, and a couple others thought that still the price tag was too high. And others were concerned with the application of our fund balance in balancing this year's budget. But I happen to agree with you and Mr. Swinkowski's use of some of these one-time accounts and special funds, because otherwise they would just be sitting there as unused liquid assets. So it is important to take advantage of these situations when they exist.
Which is exactly what we've done.
Yeah.
What we've done is carried over monies to minimize the tax burden for the citizens. So the narrative about depleting reserves is nonsense, because our reserves are still healthy. And Ed and I know, because we talk every day on this, that at the start of the new fiscal year, we're going to be right back where we were if we're 0.3% below where the fund balance is memorialized. And by the way, I'm going to make this statement. For those that think that we're compromising the fund balance or we're going to jeopardize the AAA rating, the number one factor by the rating agencies on the rating is economic development. The number one factor. And what they see in us is more success than what they've seen in any municipality that they deal with. The number one factor is economic development on being re-rated or being rated.
So, well,
No, I agree, that's what we spend the most time talking about the rating goals all the time.
when you talk about economic development, that leads right into this next mini topic here about the grand list changes over the past year. And thank you very much, Mr. Swinkowski, for passing along the annual state exemption and credit sheet showing all the changes in each category. The public should know that that industrial real property did decrease on our grand list. But this occurred through a couple of reclassifications and some tax appeal settlements. So Medtronics, the value of their building, of their complex went down over $2 million in this past year as part of I think a 5-year reduction. And we also, when New Haven Transit bought that property, the property they did, it took another $2 million off the books. So these are the unfortunate reductions that occur in the give and take of every community.
And we're still up 2.8%.
It's still, yeah. But I'm not sure why the Amazon property got reclassified from industrial to commercial. And in speaking with Mr. Johns about this, but not the entire property, just $5 million worth of that property. It may be because it's being repurposed, but for some reason, that $5 million of it did get thrown from industrial to commercial, which boosted the commercial number a little higher than in actuality it was. The commercial increase is shown on the state sheet as being 16%, but when you take the reclassifications into account, the increase was still a very hefty 14.2%. So again, just trying to make sense out of the numbers that were sent to us.
And I guess, Mike, I'd point out for those at home that those reclassifications don't affect the taxes or the mill rate at all.
It gets thrown from one category to another, one pot to another.
Right.
Same pair of pants, different pocket.
That is true, which leads to a bigger question as to why it was done, but sure, that's.
Well, I don't know the exact definition, but I wouldn't consider that industrial either. Pratt & Whitney was, but it's a warehouse.
Yeah, I know, but still, the $2 million reduction because of the New Haven Transit District, which can't even be used for the pilot program for some reason. It's some odd hybrid classification where it's treated as though it's state property, which it is, but it's not counted toward any pilot calculations.
So why change the
It's a double loss.
To bring this out to the board? What difference if it's commercial?
Commercial or industrial? Yeah, no, all I was doing was clarifying the percentage changes in each of those categories with regard to the listing of taxable property in our town. So that's all.
Okay.
But still, growth is
Outstanding.
is evident. Yeah. And thank you also, Mr. Spinkowski, for the summary of labor contract statuses. What's remarkable about this is that a lot of contracts have been signed in the last 18 months, but most of them had retroactive effective dates. And that, of course, leads to the confusion on behalf of taxpayers who look at our budget and see at times wage increases of 5.8 or 8.7%. And of course, that represents multi-year settlements, especially when you're considering all the clerical and administrative contracts here. Again, that was settled in April of this year, but has an effective date of 2016. So, transparency is always a goal, and sometimes it's hard to fully achieve. But it's unfortunate that when taxpayers become alarmed by some of these increases on a position-by-position basis in some of the later pages in our budget, that there's no ability there to explain the fact that the last increase for year to year is usually between 2.5 and 2.9%, That seems to be what most of these contracts are being settled for. But because the prior back pay that's due to them was handled within each budget under the contractual obligations line, that some of the impact of the settlement is dispersed through those prior years of accounting. On the other hand, the other problem is that if you see a 0% increase on some of these wage lines, that at times is inaccurate because it may represent the positions of an expired contract, and so it's not going to show there. It's only going to show on the contractual obligations line. And so, at times we've complimented some of our department heads and gave them credit for contracts that had not been settled. So this unknown component with regard to how the budget displays salaries can work both ways. So again, these are just explanations that I think are important for the public to know that sometimes what you're seeing is not all that's there.
Well, I mean, that was something I did years back because I just didn't want it to compromise negotiations, to know that the town set aside a certain amount of money.
Yeah, that is true, because that's true. If we put contractual obligation lines within each department, that's true. It would sort of
Telegraph
it would telegraph them as to what we believe the settlement might be.
And that's why it's lumped together, and that's why. And
Yeah.
I don't think there's a board member here that when we go through the budgets or there's reports, or especially budget times when we see zero increase, we know that it's in a separate line. And it's the other lines we're looking at as well.
Right.
And when we compliment them, we're usually complimenting them because they stayed within their budget or returned a surplus to the town, knowing that the set-aside monies is a different line anyway. So the compliments when granted are warranted, I believe.
Ed, do you know whether the Board of Ed has a comparable spreadsheet?
Probably not.
But they could have one going
Well, I
forward.
tell you,
We
this,
can request it.
Yeah.
Pam seems to be really willing to work with it, so
Good.
let her get her feet wet a little bit
Yeah,
more. It'd be nice to talk to her.
Down the road, I can see you put it together.
Yeah.
It would be fair to her to do it now.
But I think we can ask it though, Pat, I think.
Yeah, I just want to give her a little bit more time.
Sure.
She's already made some drastic increases in what we're seeing and what we're feeling more comfortable with.
Yeah, also, I think you gotta keep in mind with these salaries in the back, those are the current salaries. If you start putting anything different in there, it's arbitrary. Then you're gonna start comparing numbers from one year to the next, that might change and not be accurate. So if they don't get a raise for 3 years, that is the salary they're being paid until the contract's settled.
Yes.
So,
Anything else on the budget before we go to resolutions?
Yeah, I just have a question or a concern. So in the budget for the paramedic fees, we have 170,000. And we have that this year, and if you look at the revenue side, it doesn't look like we're gonna achieve that.
I think, Diane, that that number was projected because there is outstanding collections, and that we're working with Ed and the town attorney and the fire department to try to collect that through an outside agency. So we have projected with the input from all parties that once the collection cycle has been completed, that it would end up at $170,000.
Anything else?
Yeah, just, I also wanted to mention something here about the way that the debt expense is listed in the budget. I happen to agree with some individuals who think that the budget should reflect all income and expenses, and that somehow in some way the debt expense should be fully revealed as a line item within our budget. I know that, we do use special funds and handle them outside the budget for certain situations, but in this situation, besides the fact it's not what would be called transparent, the year-to-year comparison is going to get very difficult when in future years the debt expense in the budget goes up because it's going to be paid for out of general tax dollars instead of coming in through some being paid off to the side through some the special fund here, the debt services fund. So I know that debt services funds are going to be available to some extent next year. And maybe a little beyond that, depending on how the police bonding goes. But again, I think this document, the budget, should be as consistent as possible throughout a span of years, and it can only do so if all major big dollar expenses are fully accounted for within these pages.
So you're suggesting, and look, Ed, we can
Right.
certainly talk about this, but we put the full number in, but we're still gonna show a debt service reserve fund that's gonna offset the full number somewhere along the line.
That's because that's paid out of a separate fund.
I know, you could theoretically have the debt service fund as a source of income listed in the
Yeah.
budget, or it could be transferred into the general fund, and then the general fund can pay for it. It could have been accounted for differently, but it's...
So look, I'm open to that, okay? Debt is the debt. For that, yeah, I'm open to
Right.
that suggestion.
Right, which I know in a public viewing sort of manner will end up showing that our budget, our total town budget increased by more than 4.9%. But at the same time, I am not at all critical in any way about the 4.9 number, because the debt expense is it's like it's an already fixed expense in that it's reflective of all the prior voter approval of corresponding projects and bonding directives.
That's exactly what we've been
So
saying, yes.
I know that.
Yes.
So I'm saying that out of the $4.8 million increase in spending this year, $1 million of it is the debt expense that's in the budget as that's the debt increase within this budget. The true debt increase ends up being closer to $2.4 million with that special fund application.
Right.
But still, that if you take that $1 million out of additional expenses, this increase is really 3.9% for all other categories that are not inclusive of debt. And to me, when we're going to expand fire services and when we're going to get a dispatch system that's all in-house for the future, and take care of other important issues, that 3.9%, even though it's higher than we would like, it's showing a town that's growing too, and therefore, I think that is something that in some years like this could be tolerated, especially with a new fire truck coming on board, because that's a $600,000 hit right there.
So I thank you for that perspective. And to give you some further perspective, for what it's worth, I know some people don't like to hear about a comparative analysis. At a mayor's meeting this past week, the town of Orange is going up 0.75 mils. The town of Guilford is going up 0.75 mils. And I was with Mayor Dickinson yesterday, and they're looking at potentially a 3/4 or up to $1 mil increase just to maintain services. Here we are enhancing services, paying off debt, as Michael said, on projects that were unanimously approved by the public and still have no tax increase. The mayors that I'm very close with have said to me, we wish we were in your position to have the debt reserves accrued through bond premiums and other mechanisms. You're giving the money back to the taxpayers to avoid a tax increase. And that ties into what Michael said earlier. Rather than have it just sit there, what we've been accruing, which is a positive accrual, Ed, because of the financial efficiencies of the government and the bond premiums, we're in a position where there's a lot of other municipalities that wish we were in this position right now.
I'm sorry, Pat, go ahead.
This is related to what Diana asked about revenue for the fire fees, and then the discussion regarding collections and the cost of collections. Where are the legal fees to cover the effort to collect?
So the legal fees, Ed, you might want to time.
Yeah.
Are they, they're not, I don't see them in the
Brought
file.
on, I think within the past month, Paul, working with an attorney on that, so they're probably not going to get the fees yet.
But where will that expense go?
Probably most likely in our legal line.
For the town, not the department?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
Okay.
we only have one legal line.
But the net of it will be a positive gain through the collection process that we've put together.
We've got a pile, a lot of receivables to work on.
There's a lot of receivables, as Ed said.
Okay,
Yeah,
but that's a cost too.
Yeah. I'm not gonna, and I did listen to what you said. I don't think I would like to see it muddied up by, because it's appropriated funds that we're using. Can only be used for debt service. Putting it in and out of the budget has no
Well,
purpose.
Take the capital, take the original, for example, we spent $5 million on paying debt out of that. It wouldn't make sense to run that through the general fund. Your expenditure is in the capital project.
You know,
That's where it belongs.
you'd spike the budget when it's already been appropriated and it's sitting in a fund. Instead of an unappropriated fund, it's an appropriated fund in our budget, and it's designated in the CAFR too.
What we could do it on the page of the future then is just list all the other debt, pay
Yeah,
total.
we could do
sometimes
things like
total
that.
is a footnote.
I don't know. Somehow, I do agree with people who think it's part of the expenditures in any given year. We have debt we pay every year. Show them the true amount of debt.
But the debt will fluctuate. I mean, I don't know if we set up with balloon payments or we're just straight line.
No, this is just straight project payments from beginning to end.
Okay.
And there's nothing that unusual about this.
Something to consider. Anything else on the budget?
Well, just getting back to the usage of appropriated and unappropriated fund balances here. We did go through a series of years where we always had a lag year in taking money from a surplus, and then 1 year following the realization of that, we use it for funding in our budgets.
Right.
And so we jumped ahead of that 1 or 2 years ago, and we started using some anticipated surpluses from the end of one fiscal year, and the next day you utilized it as part of income for the next budget. And we somehow did that and kept our unappropriated fund balance around 8%. And that's pretty, that shows some foresight there. So since last year, we do believe that the surplus was around $640,000, and we're using this year, in this upcoming budget, $1.125 million in unappropriated fund balance as an income item. Do we have a surplus in the current fiscal year of at least $500,000?
I'm anticipating that at this point, yeah.
That's exactly what we've been working on for the last 6 weeks, Ed and I. And that's what our anticipation is, yes.
It is.
That's what the anticipation
Okay,
is.
because that's sort of the faith we're having when we're passing a budget with those numbers.
We understand.
And still trying to keep that 8% goal.
And that surplus will be generated through positions that we haven't replaced right away. That's at the core of us delivering a surplus. We delay positions for months at a time, and those are captured savings. Revenues that come in higher than what the projections are. And that's a second key component, Ed, between not replacing the positions and the revenues that come in that are higher than the estimated revenues. So the notion that someone said we're overestimating revenues, that's another ridiculous statement. Because when we've delivered surpluses in the past, it's those two components, positions not being replaced and revenues that came in higher than anticipated.
Yeah, no, you have a fairly good record with regard to end-of-year balances. But, you know, it could fluctuate wildly. It could be 300,000, it could be $1 million.
Right.
And sometimes it depends on what the state gives to us that we don't even, you know, that we may or may not get. But I don't think there's going to be any other surprises there. Mr. Chairman, the last point I want to make, of course, you know, I did mention some of the things I agree with, and the last thing is something I'm not relitigating here at all. I'm just saying I'm voting for the overall budget and for the Board of Ed budget. On the town side, I'm still registering a protest budget with regard to the way in which the fire department is expanding. You know, as you know, myself and Mr. Monaco do not agree with the chief with regard to the way that the whole issue was avoided in terms of the possible exploration and implementation of daytime fire paramedics that would avoid hiring 8 total new people over the next few years. But because I see that the way things are headed here, with a $125,000 per man projected expense for each new hired fireman, we are leaving $231,250 in federal dollars on the table for each one of the new hires that we have in the future. At 2 per year for 3 years, the taxpayers of North Haven will pay $1,387,500 more than they would if we utilized the SAFER grant program. And for that reason, I'm voting no. So I'm not asking for anything. There's no motion. There's no need for further discussion. But that is something that I can't sit here and just watch happening. Because I do see the way that the fire department will be growing with the way this board is handling it. So that just had to be said.
And I appreciate your comments. I mean, you know,
So I'm agreeing with you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, no, you know, my position has been in regards to the SAFER grant is that the town's hands cannot be tied when the state is so unpredictable, especially the last few years and the few years moving into the future. We cannot have our hands tied and be forced
Okay.
to carry that expense.
All right. Even though I don't agree, there's other people in town who say we need that increased manpower on all shifts. So that's what they're saying, and that's how this board is reacting. And I'm saying if you're going to react that way, use the federal dollars. But anyway, it does not matter.
Anything else?
You made your choice.
All right. Anything else on the budget? Hearing nothing else, we have 3 resolutions. You want to caucus? Is that what you're doing?
No, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm voting for the total budget
All right.
because of the 0% increase, because of it addresses some emergency concerns in the town, and as usual, takes care of the typical
And you're
needs.
gonna vote no for the town side.
That's correct.
And that's having finished that. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends a town government budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 in the amount of $49,195,637. Can I have a motion to accept that resolution?
I make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
This is my no.
Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends a Board of Education budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 in the amount of $54,590,313. Can I have a motion to accept that resolution? Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolved that a total budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 in the amount of $103,785,950, town government $49,195,637, Board of Education $54,590,313, be presented at the annual budget town meeting to be held on Monday, May 13th, 2019. Can I have a motion to pass that resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, board members. And we are to public comment. Board members have any comments on the public comment before we go to the public?
Nice job, Mrs. Smokowski. Thank you.
Yes.
And Mr. Frieda, keep working at it.
Pat, you
please.
had something?
Thank you.
No, I was,
Okay. Oh, you were thanking Mrs. Smokowski. Don't thank her. It's not over yet. No. Sally?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. I was at the Fire Commission meeting last month, and the fire chief was telling me that the 2 new hires that were hired, authorized in December and hired in January, have been working since February. So I was wondering why on page 6 of the expenditure budget, under personnel policy, the $140,000 safety issue line item that was, put in, when Mr. Frieda authorized the hiring of these 2 new guys, the understanding was that 140,000 put in as safety issue under personnel policy was going to be used to pay for the firefighters. So I'm wondering, now that they've been on the job for 2 months, why has none of the 140,000 on page 6 of your expenditure budget under personnel policy been spent?
Probably because I didn't tell payroll to charge it there. There's other just charging it for fire and mine.
So
Okay.
we'll make up the expense and correct it.
Okay, so but that 140 is still ultimately, all right, I just found it odd that nothing had come from it when they've been working for 2 months.
It'd be simply an adjustment.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask you, because this 1920 proposed budget that you all just voted to recommend to the referendum has a 67% increase in the capital budget, why you did not consider taking the $300,000 used ladder truck out of the capital budget and designating it for MRSA. As you know, in the current budget, if you look at the current page 38 capital budget for the 18-19 year, there's 5 asterisks where we took out 5 high-price items under Public Works and designated them for MRSA money. I was wondering...
The streets and road money that you were talking about, we used for Public Works,
Right.
which was kind of where their designation, and we got waivers for certain pieces of Public Works equipment
Right.
to be waived for that.
Right.
Yeah, but not fire.
Fire, I mean, first of all, yes, it's
Well, just to that point, on your special funds report, it's got a notation of 7 items totaling $916,151. So those were all authorized with MRSA waivers.
Yes.
Were there any items that you requested that were not given waivers? Okay, because
Because we talked to him on the phone before we sent the letter.
Right, so far, they've never denied any waiver. And back in 16, we got waivers for, I believe, $692,000. And again, that was for 4 items, and all 4 items were approved, and
all
one-
related to Public Works, though.
Well, one of them was a $200,000 item for remediation of the firing range, so I don't think, the police firing range, so I don't, and that was approved, so I really don't see that as related to Public Works.
Remediation on the
I've said here many times at this microphone that I think the threshold for MRSA waivers is very low, and so if something like that was approved, I think almost anything would be approved, and as you've said, nothing we've ever asked for so far. So I just wanted to throw that out there, but while we're on the subject of the MRSA amount, the $916,000, and I brought this issue up in 2016 as well, and I'm going to bring it up again. Hold on a second. Thank you. I mentioned the 5 asterisks that are on page 38 of the capital budget. And then if you look at the bottom of, this is the current 18-19 budget. And if you look down there, there's an asterisk and it says MRSA funding. And there's 5 asterisks, and I was trying to figure out, line up with a ruler, which asterisk lined up with which proposed expenditure. It was a little tough. But for example, on this list on MRSA, not double rum, that's different. Double drum roller was not listed with an asterisk. That was a $16,000 item. The Defco Park paving, a $26,000 item, was not listed with an asterisk on the capital budget. The 2019 Ford van ACO, $29,000, was not listed. The recycling trucks were there. The next one was $2,000 in van equipment. I'm not going to bother with that. The asphalt recycler was there. And then the biggest ticket item out of this 916 was almost $518,000 for 3 dump trucks. And that was asterisked, if you will, but only 1 truck, not 3. So I was just wondering, again, I've been to, I think, every Board of Finance meeting so far this fiscal year. I don't recall the Board of Finance voting on these. I know you say you got the waiver. When I challenged the $692,000 in expenditures through the MRSA waiver process in 16, I thought that it should have gone through Board of Finance. And you guys said, well, the state gave the waivers, but that doesn't have anything to do with budgetary appropriations. So again, I just want to say that for especially the items that were not designated with the asterisk in the capital budget, and I've listed, about almost $650,000 worth of items, that I still believe is my legal opinion, which I'm entitled to say that I believe that despite getting the waivers, appropriating this money without a Board of Finance vote violates not only Section 7-348 of the Connecticut General Statutes regarding excess appropriations, but also Section 707 C and D of our charter. That was my position 2 years ago, and I just want to say I continue to maintain that position. And again, my questioning of the process of approving those expenditures should not be interpreted in any way as questioning the need for these items. I just am very concerned about process. My next question is more administrative, Mr. Chairman. As you know, prior to every Board of Finance meeting, I get a packet of information in the mail. I love getting my big white envelope. I know Ellen does a good job sending everything out. Last month, I got my usual packet of records and supporting documentation. But I believe, based on an answer you gave to someone at the public hearing, that the capital budget changed from the time of the initial mailing to the time of the Board of Finance meeting about 5 days later.
We changed it at the Board of Finance meeting.
Okay, well, I just, but you must have had the new sheet ahead of time.
No, we did it that Saturday before we caucused.
Oh, okay.
We finished our caucus the day
Right.
before actually an hour before the meeting.
Okay.
And we made those changes.
Okay, because I was just saying, if there was any way that I could have been notified of those changes prior to the meeting, because I was asking questions based on the old
Pretty much
numbers.
the last minute.
Okay, well, you said Saturday, that's 4
We
days
started it Saturday
before.
and we finished
Okay.
it the hour before the meeting.
Okay, well, if there's any way that any document or any kind of list could be given to me so that I'm not standing here asking questions. I was questioning the $60,000. I wasn't for the generator, for example, but it was actually 48. I don't know, maybe Ed found it on sale at Home Depot, I don't know, but it went down, which is fine. I just, felt like I had old information, but okay, you're telling me it was an hour old, fine. My next question is, has to do with the debt service fund. can it be that the debt service fund that was recently established maybe 2 months ago by the Board of Finance, can that be included on the regular monthly special funds report with library, recreation, police OS, fire OS, MRSA, so that we could see what's in there, what's going in? You know, is that possible? And I do support Mr. Hallahan's comments that the full debt should have been reflected on the expenditure side and the 1.4 from the debt service fund included on the revenue side. So I support that in the interest of transparency. My next question, I'm trying to go quick, Mr. Chairman.
No,
I only have a couple more. On page 6 of the summary of the funding in the 1920 budget book, again, this is page 6, the summary. Why is the 1.4 million, which is part of the fund balance on the top of page 7, why is that 1.4 million specifically designated as debt service? I've never seen such a special designation delineated in that funding summary before.
She means the other page.
That'll look.
Oh, page 6, on the general fund, yeah.
Yeah.
6 or 7?
Yeah.
Page 6, well,
Oh, she's saying,
the 1.4 on the summary is specifically designated for debt reserve, I believe you have.
Yeah, that's
Why is that, if it's from the general fund?
because you have a separate fund balance for the reserves, separate from unappropriated, unassigned fund balance. And this is a general fund debt reserve of about 3.8 or 3.9 million that we're using $1 million of.
That's appropriated fund balance.
Right, just so everybody knows, this is not the special debt service fund. I know, that this is not, it's confusing because the amount is the same.
A little bit different.
I know, but I, in all these years of looking at, and again, I'm focusing on the page 6 summary of funding, I've never really seen any of them, you know, specifically designated for a certain purpose before.
That's
And I
not a
just
purpose,
found that
that's
out.
the source. And just the fund balance consists of a couple different categories, including unrestricted fund balance, which we have in
Right.
here as well.
But in
So
all
I
the prior budgets, that amount, Tim, has always been just combined as one total.
don't know that we've ever used this
I
particular
don't think
item
we
before.
have. We haven't.
This is the first time we're using it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well, again, it makes it a little confusing, and I just wanted to point that out. Finally, I had a question about the construction of the training center at Northeast Firehouse. I believe I heard that Quinnipiac University voluntary contribution is being earmarked to fund the construction of that?
Yes.
Now, is that the regular, now we haven't, according to the revenue report, we haven't gotten our voluntary
Right.
payment from Quinnipiac yet.
Right.
Okay, which is unusual because they used to start making it in
Yes.
October.
So I'll answer that. because
Okay.
That's something, again, I'm.
Board of Finance says no.
They're not even involved with this, so President Olean and I have established a very solid relationship. She's been tied up with the radio station and the Irish Museum.
I know.
So they're going to be letting us know very soon about the voluntary payment. Unlike a neighboring municipality who needs the voluntary payment to balance the budget, we've always worked with Quinnipiac to use the voluntary payment for a community project. In the past, Green Acres Playscape, we're going to be cutting the ribbon at Ridge Road very soon for a handicap accessible playscape for visually impaired children. The PTA there, I work very closely with at Ridge Road. So yes, to answer your question, this year they were totally on board with a voluntary payment that could be used to build a training facility for the fire department.
Okay.
That's
The
what,
reason I ask is, I know that a couple of years ago, they gave money in addition to their regular voluntary contribution for some work having to do with the girls softball field. Correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah, that was, you're
That
right.
was an
Yeah,
additional.
the lights.
So
with the
that's what
lights
I
there.
wanted to know. So when you say that the Quinnipiac voluntary contribution is being earmarked for the construction of the training center, it's the regular payment.
Yes.
All right, but you also said that the Quinnipiac voluntary contribution is not used to balance our budget. I disagree. It is a regular line item in our revenue budget every year that we've been getting it. So if it is a regular line item, it's on page 8, I believe, of the revenue budget every year, then isn't it in fact part of balancing the budget?
Well, I think that's a good point. And when I say it's not used to balance the budget, essentially what I'm saying is it's not needed to balance the budget. So, but that might be something we could look at and put that aside.
Here's my concern. It is part of the revenue budget. It is earmarked to balance the budget. Therefore, you would have to look at that money as revenue to fund the budget. And the money for the Northeast Firehouse Training Center is not in the budget.
Right. I think
so
it's
that's the
valid-
problem that I have with it.
I think it's a good point you make.
So that's why I was wondering if, like a couple of years ago, they were making an additional payment, similar, but you're saying no, so I'm not sure that's an appropriate use of a regular line item, which is part of our budget, to be used for something that is not in the expenditure budget. And finally, I just wanted to address a couple of the comments that the first selectman stated earlier in his presentation when he said, quote, that there's some gloom and doom in papers is a bunch of nonsense. I take issue with that classification for the following reason. I'm not really questioning the current solid footing financially of our town, although Mr. Swinkowski did say at the public hearing that the fund balance is now under 8 million, but it does fluctuate. So it is under 8%. If it's under 8 million, I mean, we're at 103 now, so it's going to have to be 8 million, almost 8.4 million. Right. But much of my perspective on this budget, which was from a conservative fiscal position, and I don't think it's a bunch of nonsense, because the basis of my initial approach was really based on comments, Mr. Chairman, that the first selectman has made several times, not only here, but perhaps at the Board of Selectmen meeting, warning us of, based on possible changes, proposals, mandates, taxing, restructuring in Hartford of costing us anywhere from $7 to $22 million. So again, I'm not predicting, I never used the term gloom and doom, and I don't think it's a bunch of nonsense to have a fiscally conservative, fiscally prudent approach when that approach is primarily based on the first selectman's warnings of the future.
So can I explain that?
I took offense with calling it a bunch of nonsense when I was basing it on something you said.
What's a bunch of nonsense is those that are saying that the financial stability of the town is compromised, that we're using reserves and that they're going to compromise the financial integrity of this organization. That's a bunch of nonsense.
Right,
Now, let me address your question,
Okay.
because what you don't realize, and I wouldn't expect you to realize this, is that, and I think Sherman and I had this discussion recently, I try to provide information to be as transparent as possible in real-time fashion. What that means is I'm getting information from the state, I'm sharing it with the people here. So when I talked about the $7 million worth of car tax and the Homestead Act, which could affect us by $22 million, that was a bill at the time that was proposed that I was alerting the public to. But what I couldn't expect you to know, because you're not dealing with this every day like we are, that things happen in a fluid and changing fashion. So when I say that, I now know, which we didn't know 2 months ago, that bill's going nowhere, the car tax bill. It has no support. But we didn't know that back then. So I'm beginning, and Sherman and I kind of joked about this the other day, I'm beginning to think that I shouldn't provide information in real-time fashion. And if you remember, because you go back and watch all the meetings, that Mary White, I asked a question months and months ago, and Mary and her husband said, we like the information in real-time fashion.
Well, my approach at this particular budget season of being somewhat more fiscally prudent or conservative and having concerns with a 4.9% increase, part of it was was that. The other part was the 1.4 million that we're going to be using from the debt service fund, I believe is only going to be around until next year. And I believe you termed it at the Board of Selectmen workshop, which was an open meeting, it was not executive session. You said after that there'll be a big gulp. So that was your term, not mine. So that was another reason for my concern about the 4.9 increase. Not just, and I understand, I agree with you that if you hear of potentials, and I try to keep informed. I read everything that comes in from CCM. I talk to Mr. Fasano, I talk to Mr. Iacarino. I could read, so I know what's going on in Hartford. Maybe not to the depth that you do, but I read the CCM reports every couple of weeks, very in depth. So it wasn't just that. It was the fact that the budget is based on some sources of revenue that aren't always going to be there. So it's the combination of many things. But anyway, to call it a bunch of nonsense, I thought was a little unfair when I'm trying to do what I think is best for taxpayers. And you've said this yourself as well. The number one complaint you get from people is taxes going up. So, for me to get out my microscope and look closely at all of these funding sources, I don't think is a bunch of nonsense. I think it's my right and my obligation to look closely at it. So that's all I really wanted to say.
So I want to be clear. What I feel is nonsense is those that are saying, and it may not be you that are saying this, by the way, okay?
Right.
Those that are saying the financial stability of this organization is being compromised by using reserves, and the hypothetical analysis that we're going to be losing a AAA rated status, that's nonsense. I don't think you said that.
Well, I've said part of that about being concerned about relying so heavily on sources of revenue that aren't always going to be there. And I know that there's great hope that future economic development will pick up the slack. I understand that. I have a piece of paper signed by you saying there'll never be a tax increase, and I guard that piece of paper with my life.
So did I deliver this year on that? I delivered on that, right?
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens when these other sources of revenue dry up. And I never said, that revenue source, whether you were referring to me or not, I'm going to respond. I never said that certain revenue sources were overestimated. I said that there were some aggressive predictions on of certain revenue sources in the revenue budget, and I made that statement. Again, aggressive is different than overestimated. I made that conclusion that they were aggressive based on prior years where I saw revenues coming in higher, but yet the new budget back down. This year, everything seems to be a little more aggressive. So saying it was overestimated, not quite clear.
Can I just
Sure.
square up your comment? You can speak again, but I do want to see if there's anything else you want to speak.
That was my last thing on my list. Thank you very much for your time.
I got
thank you for your
last
time.
meeting. Sherman, did you want? No, good.
Nancy Barrett, Crestview Drive. So I just have one general question and two more specific questions that really piggyback on some of the comments that have been made tonight. So Mr. Frieda has said that he and Mr. Schwankowski are planning 6 and 7 years in advance for both on the revenue side as well as managing our debt, and I absolutely believe that that's the case. But I also hear in discussions about the SAFER grant, for example, that this Board of Finance is really trying to plan year to year. So my question is, does the Board of Finance, both individually and collectively, do you view your budget development responsibilities to be limited to 1 year at a time, or do you also factor in the impact of budgeting decisions for the next for next fiscal year on future years? And what I'm trying to get at is this attitude that I believe Mr. Hallahan had mentioned, that you can't possibly argue against a budget that has a 0 mill rate increase. And so I guess the question is this conclusion true no matter how it's achieved? no matter what is excluded, no matter what is just not disclosed to the public, no matter what rainy day accounts have to be drained, no matter what the impact on our bond rating, no matter what impact it will have on future annual budgets. So I'd just like to try to understand, are you just really looking at 1 year at a time, or are you actually trying to consider that increasing the base by $5 million, even with a 0 mill rate increase, could have significant impacts on our mill rate increase in the following fiscal year and in years to come?
The Board of Finance the duty of the Board of Finance is to present the budget. We look at the current budget we're working on. We're conscious of the fact that decisions we make today will extend into the future years. When we hire personnel, those personnel are pretty much with us forever. So we're conscious of that fact.
Right.
When we purchase equipment, we're not worried about purchasing equipment the next year because we don't have to usually purchase equipment in succeeding years. So I'm not quite sure what you're asking. In draining reserves, I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's not the case at all.
I'm trying to get at the $2.5 million from the general fund. That's a very large transfer from our general fund compared to previous years. So
There's not a $2.5 million.
Well, 1.4 is from the reserves.
Right.
General
It's
fund.
one of them is
all combined.
appropriated, one's
It's-
unappropriated.
I
Those are
understand,
different
but
funds.
in previous years,
One
it's
of them
always
can only
been
be
combined.
used for debt.
Right.
So you're,
But it's still a transfer from our general fund, which is our rainy day fund, correct?
well,
No.
no.
It's not.
No, it's not.
No,
No.
please explain.
So Ed just mentioned 1.4 million out of the debt reserve fund. So the actual number is very similar to what we've carried over in years past out of the fund balance.
Unappropriated
Out of
fund
the unappropriated fund balance, 1.1 million. We've been in that area for many years now. What you're missing is we've booked aside money in the debt reserve fund, the 1.4 million that we're carrying over. And you don't seem to understand that that's money we've been putting aside and have put aside for years to prepare for this day. I've said this 9 times already.
Right.
So if that money wasn't there, that we didn't put aside, then that would be a $500,000 tax increase right there.
Right, but the money that you're putting aside, it's from previous surpluses, correct?
No.
No,
So
no.
where is
no.
that coming from, that it's being put into our
It's
general fund?
appropriated funds, it comes from the bonding. As
Those are
Mr.
from
Friedrich
other
explained.
projects
Right.
Other projects in the town is
We've
bonded.
explained this many times.
So this is not the debt service fund?
No.
It
This is a total separate thing?
Right.
No.
Yep.
The $1.4 million that you're referring
Which
to is
1.4?
within the general fund, which is different from the $1.4 million in the debt service fund, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So-
So the combined amount from the general fund is $2.52 million,
Well, you have
correct?
appropriated and.
Correct, but it's-
1.4 from the reserves in the general fund.
Right, but it's
And
still from the
outside of
general
that,
fund.
You're paying 1.4 out of the debt service fund. which is
Correct.
bond.
Correct. That's
Hey,
a separate
hey,
thing.
can I
I'm
clarify
saying
something
from
there?
the general fund.
The 8% that we've talked about, right?
Right.
That's the unappropriated.
Appropriated fund balance.
Right.
The total fund balance is larger.
That's right.
And some of the dollars we're talking about are within those other categories within the general fund
There's other
balance.
categories of
Right.
fund balance.
Right.
Yes.
Michael said that.
I've said it
several
many times, every time we've said this. You have an unappropriated and an appropriated fund balance.
Right, and as Sally pointed out, in previous years, we've always had on page 6, a single number from the fund balance, a single
never
number. And then on
used-
page 7, it's broken out into the 2 numbers.
No, we've never used,
We've never used
Well,
the
we-
money from the general
the-
fund
right.
as debt reserves.
Right.
yeah.
This is the first time.
This is the first time?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, and then just to piggyback on what Pat was saying, again, getting back to the January 7th Board of Selectmen budget workshop, that the Board of Selectmen agreed in consideration of many variables to support a budget that does not exceed the 2.6% increase. And so, again, just piggybacking on what she had said, that is far less than the 6.6% increase in the proposed total town side, and then the 4.9% for the total budget. And Mr. Frieda had said, well, this was way back in January when they didn't have all the data and information, but I do actually have a copy of that preliminary budget from January, and it shows almost a 6.4% increase on the town side right out of the chute. And the dollar difference between the January draft of the budget and then the final version that you just voted on, if you consider town, capital, and contingency, the difference is only about $100,000, which is really negligible. And the combination of those three numbers, the change from January of 7.5% to a 7.3% increase is relatively small. So it seems like you actually had a lot of the information back in January.
What you're missing is that we reserve the right to cut back the department head requests, including the Board of Education,
Right.
by factoring in a possible 2.6% increase. But we didn't do that. We listened to all the presentations. We kept the Board of Ed at 2.9%. We ended up putting the 4 dispatchers in. So in the early stages, in January, we put a projection together, a preliminary number, and that projection is based on the fact that we probably could cut back some of the anticipated requests. But we didn't do that with the Board of Ed, and that was 1.5 million right there. So this is a procedural issue. I've explained it many times. In some respects, it's an outdated procedure because we're giving a recommendation without really hearing the full story and having this Board of Finance digest all of the information.
And if I could, myself and even Sally and even Bill have been on both sides of that conversation, meaning that we've all sat on the Board of Selectmen, and we've all sat on this board. And that occurs in January, and it's difficult. I mean, I always saw that letter as aspirational, if you will. What Mike said is true. You don't have the medical insurance numbers at that point in time. I don't know, by the way, if we had the firemen in there or the dispatchers.
No, I don't
when we
think
get
we
presented the budgets, that's a request. I don't believe those were in that original budget. So, listen, we're in a room, we get a presentation from Ed, we go over some of the numbers, but it's hard to dig deep on a $103 million budget in a relatively short meeting, and it's really this board that ultimately decides what happens. So I understand what you're saying, but I guess I never drew as strong a connection that you're drawing between what the Board of Selectmen wanted. Okay, listen, we're never going to say we want a 6% increase. You're never going to get that letter from the Board of Selectmen. They're going to say, we want 2.6, we want 3, we want 4. They're going to say something that's reasonable. We're not going to send the signal right out of the gate that it's okay to spend money, at 6, 7, 8, 9%.
And you need to realize, both in the framework of state statute and the framework of the town charter, it's this board that decides the wants and needs for those presentations and those workshops.
Right. But if it had started at 2.6 and then you heard the workshops and it went up to 6.6, I would understand. But in the same month, the Board of Selectmen is saying 2.6, and then the first version of the budget, again, in January, had a 6.6% increase. So that's what I don't understand.
Well, I just tried to explain it. The 2.6% is sort of a table setter with the anticipation that we can cut back what you see in the January budget. We chose not to cut that back as a Board of Finance. So this is the same thing every year. This has been decades of this. That Board of Selectmen recommendation is a table setter. It's a procedural table setter that this Board of Finance has the final jurisdiction on.
Right.
So this Board of Finance could have cut back that January budget to 2.6%, but this Board of Finance decided not to do that, myself included.
Well, the Board of Ed number was pretty close to that, at 2.9. It was more on the town side that it's up at the 6.6 level. So,
We also added several positions in town.
right. Okay.
All right.
All right, and I would have to just agree with the comment made by Mr. Hallahan that I think that it really makes a lot of sense to account for the debt service fund, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side, because again, the underlying intent of GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, regulations, provisions, and policies for municipal budgeting, is to increase transparency for not only the public, but also for the investors. The investors should be able to see in our reporting, what is the total debt? They should be able to see what are all of the incremental sources of revenue, and they should be able to see what are the incremental sources of
When you mean
expenditure.
investor, what do you mean by investors?
Whether it be you're selling bonds again and you're selling the notes, whatever the case may be, you should have
And that's all in the
transparency.
CAFR.
But that's all in the, it's all in the
That's what they
CAFR.
see.
That's what they see.
All
So
that
it's
information
all
is
seen.
present.
It's all transparent. It's all seen.
So $9.1 million is listed in the CAFR and
All
1.
the debts listed. Now, the CAFR, you know, the CAFR is ended the fiscal year, so the last one we have is June 30th of last year.
It shows future debt
Shows
payments.
future debt, right.
Right.
So, again, you're
But
missing
does it show the 1.4 on both the revenue side and the expenditure side?
Well, this is
for the
last
debt
year's
service
CAFR we're
fund?
talking about.
Total debt outstanding
Yeah.
by year.
But does it show the debt service fund as both a source? Okay, so
So the
I would just
next
recommend, I
CAFR will
agree with
show
Mr.
it.
Hallahan
But-
and Ms. Buemi that I think we should have that for transparency
But what,
purposes.
again, you're missing is that it will happen in next year's CAFRA. That's the Bible, okay? So it's going to
As well as in our budget. I think it should be in our budget as
No.
well. And again, it shouldn't have any impact. If it's on both the revenue and the expenditure side, it shouldn't have an impact.
Of course it has an impact. If you showed it on both sides of the budget, the net tax increase wouldn't be anything, but the budget would increase, which would change what we would want to carry for fund reserve, which would increase our unappropriated fund balance. There's no reason to do that.
It's just transparent. If it's a source of
But it
income,
would
we should.
increase our unappropriated fund balance, and there's no reason to increase our unappropriated fund balance over the 8%. That is, the dollar amount is that right now. It would net out as a zero equation. There's no reason to put it in there.
I understand.
But it
I'm saying
would,
for transparency
it would
purposes.
cause us to look at unappropriated fund balance going up,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no need for it. That's holding taxpayers' money for no reason.
Right. Although the accountants did say that they're looking at 10 to 15%, not 8%, correct?
No.
For AAA bond rating?
No,
No.
no.
I don't know where you're getting some
Yeah, I don't know where
information.
you're getting this
He
information.
sat here and
he
said this
said
to you.
8%.
He said
He said you
many
could-
other towns are shooting for 10
Well,
to 15%.
that would be on a smaller town. I can-
And it varies depending upon the size of the
Listen,
town,
I see
absolutely,
financial
and your
statements from
level of
towns every
economic
day,
development.
okay?
I understand.
I've seen numerous this week, and I probably saw 10. And in general, what you're going to see is the larger the town, then the smaller the unappropriated general fund balance as a percent, because the dollars are
Sure,
higher,
of
right?
course, the numbers are bigger.
Smaller towns are going to have the 10 or 15%, and since we're sort of in the middle, we're at the 8%. I think that's what you're going to see.
Right.
But you can't suggest through your comments that we should be at 10 to 15%, because that's kind of what you referenced here. We
What-
shouldn't be at 10 or 15%. We don't need to be.
What Mr. Joe Centofanti said when he reviewed the CAFR report was he cited a fund balance of 10 to 15% among many of his clients who are trying to
Yes,
achieve
but
a certain
I remember the statement. I remember he said, okay?
But you have to understand.
And
you
there
have
are
to
many
understand
variables,
There's
absolutely.
a consultant that we've hired, just as we would hire a lawyer to
understand.
provide their opinion.
Yes.
It's this board's responsibility to weigh that opinion and take appropriate action. This board's appropriate action is 8%. I have no intentions of raising unappropriated fund balance at 10% and holding more taxpayer money for no reason.
I'm not suggesting that you
Well, that's, you're mentioning it, why?
Sometimes we have this exact same accountant making recommendations, and we all jump
No,
and say yes.
you just said he
And
made
other
a
times we say
recommendation
no.
to some of his clients.
Right.
He wasn't recommending
He
to
wasn't
the town.
recommending us. That's what you're kind of presenting here. So we're going to challenge you on this.
Fine.
You shouldn't
Go ahead
be-
and challenge me.
You shouldn't be suggesting we should be at 10 to 15%. That's what you're suggesting.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the accountant that sat here and reviewed the fact that we are at 8% also suggested that many of his other clients are at 10 to 15%.
No, he didn't suggest, he made a comment that most of his other clients are in that range.
Not most, he said some.
Or some of his
And secondly
clients
of
are in
all,
that
I would
range.
add that where the rubber meets the road here is, if when you read our report, when the last time we got our bonds rated, if they thought we were low, they would have said it. And I don't have that in front of me, but I'm betting Ed or Mike
That's
might
right.
remember. If they didn't say that, then it's not a concern.
It's not a concern at all that we should be at 10 or 15%. It's not a concern at all.
Right. Well, I think I remember you talking about this very issue that you had some concerns about setting aside another $2 million. So you actually had this discussion during the February Board of Finance meeting.
What discussion was that? That I suggested we should be at 10 to 15%?
At 10%.
That's not the case at all.
Okay.
We memorialized 2 or 3 years ago 8%.
I remember.
So the notion that we're suggesting we should be at 10 to 15% is not the case at all.
Okay.
I just gave an update earlier that the largest component of this government is economic development on being rated. The rating agencies are thrilled we're at 8% because they see the number one thing in their eyes, economic development. Tim just explained it very, very well.
Right.
There should be no notion or suggestion that we're thinking we should be at 10 to 15%.
Right, but with this budget, we will be below the 8%, correct?
But we're going to be making that up right away, and that is not going to affect us at all.
Okay,
So-
I hope not. I hope not. Okay, so on a related note pertaining to the actions of the auditor's recommendations, I watched the January 15th Board of Finance meeting video recording and noticed that, once again, accountant Mr. Joseph Centofanti from O'Connor Davies stated that the $7,500 projected value threshold for the public bidding process was, quote, a little low. As a best practice, he recommended increasing it to $20,000. Now, he didn't offer any specific justification as to why he recommended that change, just that that's the number that he offered. And I believe it was Tim said, okay, well, why don't we put this on the agenda for the February Board of Finance meeting, and we'll have a discussion about it. But the February Board of Finance agenda came through and included a resolution increasing the bid threshold to $25,000. And just before you voted, Mr. Hallahan asked, this is what the auditor recommended, right? To which Mr. Monaco said yes. So the specific resolution to amend the finance ordinances of the town of North Haven was then passed at a special town meeting by a whopping 4-3 vote. And I just want to point out that the auditor did not recommend this $25,000 threshold. And there was no public discussion of the threshold amount by the entire Board of Finance. It might have happened at the Republican caucus, but it did not happen among all of the members of the Board of Finance.
Well, you're saying you recommended.
When the resolution is made, there's an opportunity for every board member to discuss it. If no one discussed it, no one discussed it.
But
You're
Mr.
saying you
Hallahan
recommended-
asked very specifically, this is what the auditor recommended, and you said yes.
What we're
And-
saying is he recommended 20, we approved 25, correct?
That's my contention, yes.
So despite what may have been a slightly incorrect answer, that's a really de minimis number on a $103 million budget.
Well, here's the point. Since your Board of Finance vote was predicated upon the assumption that the resolution reflected in the auditor's recommendation, I would argue that your entire Board of Finance vote was null and void, and likewise, the 325 special town meeting vote on a resolution assumed to be supported by the Board of Finance should also be deemed invalid.
I think that's a question for the town attorney.
Yeah. Well,
I think
What would you say, Mr. Chairman?
I don't see how, if the legislative body of the town approved it, no matter what the Board of Finance did or did not do, that makes it final. We
But
can consult
the
the town
legislative
attorney.
body is
The legislative
assuming-
body is the public.
Right,
And if the public voted yes,
predicated
voted-
upon your assumption.
the public
your
voted
support.
yes to a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
We just recommended it went to a meeting. The Board of Finance just recommends it goes to a town meeting. There could be discussion at the town meeting, it could change it. I don't know, might be able to change it at the town meeting, I'm not even sure. But the legislative body approved it. If you like, we can ask the town attorney if there was anything inappropriate. Does Mr. Hallahan have a problem if the threshold was 20 or 25? I wouldn't think he would. But it's neither, it was a legislative body that approved the resolution. This board made a recommendation, sent it to a town meeting, the town meeting made the decision.
So how did it go from 20 to 25?
Misspoke. I didn't think, maybe it was 25.
No, it was Joe
It was 20.
recommended 20, and I
20.
made it 25, because this budget is going to continue to increase.
So if I
over the
misspoke,
next several
I
years.
apologize for
No,
misspoken.
you didn't misspoke. Obviously, it was on the agenda as 25.
Yes, no, but if I misspoke in the fact that I thought the auditor had said 25, it was 20-something. Mr. Hallahan, I apologize, I've misled you.
So I guess the question is, was it your decision then to change it from 20 to
This
25?
budget is going to continue to increase over the next couple of years, and I don't think we're going to keep doing this every couple of years. Besides, it's not too many bids that actually come in between 20 and 25 anyway.
So the
The
change.
finance director made a suggestion, made a recommendation to the Board of Finance that it be 25,000. The Board of Finance approved it at 25,000. The town, or rephrase, the Board of Finance sent it to a special town meeting where it was approved by the legislative body at 25,000.
So you don't feel as though there's any problem?
I don't.
Okay. All right, well, if you wouldn't mind contacting the town attorney, I would
Mr.
appreciate it very
Lukowski,
much.
can you ask the town attorney?
That would be great. Thank you so much for your time.
Any other public comment?
Yes,
Sure.
sure.
Sherman Katz, Sherwood Drive. It's gonna be short and sweet. I don't hear the same thing about gloom and doom in this town. So I guess we don't travel in the same circles. A lot of the people are saying, I can't do anything about it anyhow. What's the sense? Why go bother and vote? I can't do anything
You
about
should
it.
go vote.
When you get 7 people at a town meeting, it's ridiculous.
I was laid out.
When you get 5 and 6% to vote on a referendum, that's foolish. We're getting closer and closer to the point where we may be able to get better representation with a not a town form of government, but either an RTM or alderman type of form, where you don't have the good old boys running the crew.
Sure, can I just say something to you? East Haven has a council form of government, they had a public meeting, 3 people showed up for the budget. 3 people, because there's no tax increase.
Well, that's
the fact that's been reported in the paper.
You know, the no tax increase is kind of misleading, but I don't want to get into an argument with you about that now because we're not going to go anywhere with it. You're going to go no tax increase this year. I don't know what you're going to do next year. I'm not picking on the fire department, but I'm going to bring them up as a point. By the end of 3 years, the next 3 years, we're going to have a $1.5 million, or you said 1.3 something, I figured 1.4 million, increase in our budget just for the additional 8 men, and he's 8 people. And the chief is looking for 16. Now, I'm sure that he's going to get his 16 at some point, the same way he got his 8. But that's as much as I want to talk about anything that really went on here tonight. But I will remind Mike Frieda something that happened many years ago when your predecessor was no longer was out for whatever reason. As we left the meeting, we walked through the library parking lot, and Mike said, I have to look for a new finance officer now. And I said, why? He said, well, so-and-so is leaving. I said, yeah, but you have his assistant who is fully capable. Why don't you talk to him? And he said, that's a good idea. See, you owe me for your job.
And I will say that this man here is outstanding to work with. He's the best finance director in the state. I know I'm biased, but I love working with this guy every day.
Any other comments? Seeing none, motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
All right, thank you.
We're adjourned.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.